How do you tell what the difference is between somebody who is, maybe they're just a bully, okay, and someone who's, it's like, Richard the Third, plots have I laid out, right? People who plan out their strategy of being, well, kind of Machiavellian. That's the good word for it. Let's bring in the good doctor here. Machiavelli was, of course, Italian, and so was his prince, and he wrote a book about it. I read it in high school. It was amazing and a little scary too. But Dr. John Braccio is the head of regional psychological services in East Lansing, Michigan. drjohnb.com. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Never better. Always good talking with you, Dave.
Outstanding. Machiavelli was something. I mean,
yeah, he really was.
The book is great, but it's also, it's not, I mean, it's a blueprint for how to scheme. I mean, in an incredibly pragmatic way.
Yes, he wrote it in 1513, so it's over 500 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was really perfecting the art of war, so to gain power and keep it. He had a couple of statements that are quite well known. Better to be widely feared than to be greatly loved, and then the end justifies the ends. The end justifies the means, okay? So I think this type of person is quite devious, okay? Unlike the narcissist, common bully, or sociopath, who are relatively quickly found out, the situation is different with the Machiavellian manipulator, because they skillfully pretend to fairly live with agreed-upon social rules and norms. They often cleverly work within the system to achieve maximum success for themselves, regardless of the negative consequences for others. And because they are so deceitful, they can be very effective because they use the correct words, techniques to advance. They're really hard to identify, Dave, and often by the time you've identified their evil deeds, they've succeeded at your expense. So it can be even a very difficult experience for you. Then even make it worse, even when they do this, often someone else might not even be aware of it, or others might not be aware of it. So I think the best way to determine if you're interacting with a Machiavellian manipulator is observe, listen to comments of others, discreetly talk to others, and observe outcomes from interactions they have. And if ever you've encountered one, you're certainly aware of how difficult it is to identify them. So I think a concise definition, just a manipulator in general, is using inappropriate psychological techniques with other persons to control their thoughts and actions. It can happen in any setting, most common in close relationships such as family, spouses, friendships, and work settings. And the manipulative techniques that are used, and often very subtly, deceitfully, by the Machiavellian manipulator would include using these games with guilt, blame, complaints, playing innocent or ignorant, gaslighting, lying, bullying, mind games, insecurities, weak spots of yours, mockery, judging. And when these techniques are skillfully camouflaged, really the victim can be amazed and shocked when they learn what is happening to them. It can happen in a relationship, it can happen in a work setting. And if you're in one of these relationships, you really better seek out support of friends, colleagues, and professional support to minimize the damage done to you socially, psychologically, personally, professionally. And Dave, a lot of people run into these people. And one of the dangers of how clever they are, because they use the rules of the system deceptively, deceitfully, often someone isn't really aware of what they're doing. I mean, it's not like the bully who comes right in and, punches you, hits you, runs you around. They are clever, and they have no sense of right or wrong because the end justifies the means. That's why it's come down to us in such a negative way, because Machiavelli had a negative view of human nature. He was actually Christian, but he had a negative view of human nature, and he was really talking about how to deal, with states, government, call it what you will, but it's come down the negative aspects of what he taught, if you will, or he was trying to actually get back in with the Medici family, I might add, for a little bit of history. So it's just important if you find
these are people you wanted to be friends with in the in the 15th century, right? You wanted to be friends with these people because you had the entree to power.
That is true, and that's what he studied. So
Sure.
if you're with, so these are difficult people, but they're clever, they're intelligent, and they will use anything they can to their own advantage. And if you work with them, this is a common setting. People that rise in systems, they supposedly follow the rules, but they're the ones whispering in the corner. They're the ones changing people's minds. They're the ones that are just really rocking and rolling with other people's emotions. And if you find you're being put back or held back, and it can be in relationships too, they are alive and well in many places. But again, the key thing, unlike the bully, unlike the sociopath, unlike the narcissist, they're often very, very hard to determine who they are because they're very, very good at what they do. And if they're not trying to take advantage of you, and you aren't even in their realm, you're not going to pick up on it. That's how good many of these people are. They're in politics often. They're in relationships. They're in the work setting. So it's wise to just keep an eye out because they're clearly out there, and many read this book and actually can pick up some negative traits, even though I do believe, not to defend Machiavelli, a lot of his point was how do you really run a state and how do you do things in a world where there were kings and queens?
It's exactly right. I mean, people from town to town were at each other's throats.
That's right.
And in Italy, yeah, in Italy, that was especially true, broken up into so many different principalities that aligning for power, ditching that alliance and this was statecraft of the time.
Yes.
And in that way, here I'm going to put something forward for Machiavellian. In that way, he was really ahead of the game. And it's a brilliant writing, but it's also, if you are going to rule your life this way, I think you're going to become a person that others might not want to be around much because they're going to be collateral damage in a lot of different ways, and you're not going to care. I mean, that's you. Luckily, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've crossed paths with a lot of people who fit this. Some, yes. Thankfully, not a lot. That's a good thing overall. Yeah. I mean, this doesn't add. This isn't most people. Thank goodness. Is it?
No. First of all, it takes a very clever, deceitful person who really doesn't have a moral compass. It's a person who's just out for themselves. I think we do see when we see people that, I hate to pick on politicians, but people that can totally shift a view on a moral issue or something critical to advance themselves. And I don't think there are a lot. I'm just trying to give an obvious example. When that happens, you have to really wonder, is the change, did it occur because they really believe that or because this is the winds of change
wind's
that they need to maintain power? But we see it in relationships, the gaslighting, the finding flaws, working. But I think the place where most apt in a general sense to run to them are going to be in a work setting. They're going where we can have a neutral relationship with someone, but all of a sudden there's a competition or something comes up or there's a way to advance. And all of a sudden you find somebody who's advanced ahead of you, and you're not quite sure how it happened. But then when you analyze it and look at it, you can see what happened. They worked behind the scenes. They were planting things in people's minds, doing things. And when that happens and you see it, often there's nothing you can do, because if you're in the work setting and the person has really followed the rules but did them in a deceitful way but so cleverly that people aren't aware of it, it can do you in, and then that can really lead. And I've run into people that have had this happen a lot in the work setting, and obviously we see it in marital relationships. We see it in interactions with supposed friends, that the end justifies the means. So you are a good friend, a useful friend, even a reliable friend, until the event comes up that someone wants something, and then all bets are off. It all of a sudden becomes.
If you recognize this trait in somebody else, I mean, unless you're married to them, but I mean, even then, I probably should have thought about that beforehand. Maybe there were warning signs and red flags. But do you walk the other direction? Just go completely, if you can. Is it best just to get away from them totally?
Well, I think you have to. You have to remember, if you're dealing with a sly, distrustful, cynical, callous, deceptive human being, but others don't see it, and I would have minimal contact with them. If you have to work with them, just have your guard up. Be aware. Forewarned is forearmed, and that I think that is, I think that's a key word, because they can really hold you back professionally, personally, psychologically, and they can really say bad things about you. They can actually put a lack of trust in you and others if they're really good at manipulating minds. It could be the boss, it could be coworkers. So there really are dangers. These are dangerous. They enjoy it on top of everything else, but they do have a goal.
Yeah, it means that their plan's underway. It's working, and that's how they've got things laid out on the chessboard here. The Machiavellian Manipulator here. If you look through history, there have been people. Sometimes it's the unseen hand with the politician, maybe somebody who's helping to guide things along, create the web of intrigue. Maybe in fiction, maybe it's somebody like Iago to Macbeth. But people who've got a plan, and as they carry it out, it's quite amazing, but pretty darn nasty. Avoid. Don't avoid the good doctor, though. drjohnb.com for Dr. John Braccio, Regional Psychological Services of East Lansing. Take care, my friend. We will talk again after the holiday. Have a wonderful July 4th.
Same to you, my friend. Great celebration of the country. Talk to you later.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, sir. All right. We're back in a moment on the Morning Wake Up, 1320 WILS.